Blake is pulling double duty for some time now. I know he's enjoying that. All of us are working through the pandemic, aren't we? Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. The SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by the Men's Clinic, Dr. Mike Manning and Dr. Cliff Adams. The Men's Clinic, anti-aging. The Men's Clinic. If you feel like you're low T, low testosterone, you can go there and get a free blood test. They'll tell you what, they'll walk you through some options if you are low T. The Men's Clinic, don't forget about their website, themanthing.com. They just built a beautiful new clinic in Madison on Highland Colony. Dr. Mike Manning and Dr. Cliff Adams, the Men's Clinic, themanthing.com. We are ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We're streaming on our YouTube channel right now. You can see all the cool stuff in studio. Go to YouTube, search Out of Bounds Sports, not Show. Show is for all the podcast. Sports is for YouTube. YouTube channel or whatever, your YouTube app. I use the YouTube app. I guess that's what everybody uses. And search Out of Bounds Sports. We're going to go to, I think, Starkville, Mississippi. Did we get Steve? Okay. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Mississippi State site, MSU Insider. Steve joins us on the Miller Lite guest line. Steve, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Bo. How are you? Things are well.
Good. All right, so there's a lot going on here. Colin Hill comes out earlier this week and says that he's not going to play under the current state flag. There's a lot going on down at the legislature, but we don't know how this is going to shake out the next 3 or 4 days. If they don't get anything done, we don't know if they'll come back before Labor Day. What do you think that if for some reason they can't get this done, God forbid, do you think that Colin Hill would be willing to walk back what he said earlier in the week, Steve?
Well, I think it's important to look at what he actually said. He didn't say that he wouldn't play. He said he wouldn't represent the state. Now, there's a little ambiguity in every bit of that. I have spoken with some folks that actually believe that should this not get taken care of, and as you mentioned, God forbid, Colin Hill is probably better served playing and then speaking his mind every time a microphone is put in his place. Go out and run for 200 yards, win a big ball game, go on national television and say, hey, listen, I'm playing for my brothers, I'm playing for my university, but this state flag has to be changed. And so I don't think at this point you can say 100% he's not going to play. I think that there's an opportunity for him to walk this back and still be a bit of an advocate for change within the state of Mississippi.
Okay. It's going to be do you think any other player – I haven't heard of any other players, but you're closer to it than we are. Have you heard of any other players that will take Colin's stance?
I've actually heard rumors of several, even around the country, not even from the state of Mississippi. Of course, the natural thing is you'd expect at some point, somebody from Ole Miss or Southern Miss will likely come out and show some solidarity to the cause. But as I mentioned yesterday, we've actually had some rumors about some New Mexico players that are planning to put, either a boycott or a protest of their own about coming to Mississippi to play under the state flag. And that's one of those things that I don't think a lot of people really consider, is that this is not simply a Mississippi issue, but only Mississippi can change it.
Wow, that's a great point. That could be any number of sports, Steve, that you could see that.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing it with businesses and corporations too. And I think it's important that people understand this is not simply a bump in the road. This isn't just something that, it'll leave the headlines a week from now. No, it's not. People have kind of dug in their heels here, and they're really holding the feet to the fire of the state legislature right now to get something done. And there are some people that are, optimistic something will get done, but I continue to hear that they don't have the votes in either chamber at this point, but there's still some political maneuvering taking place. I understand there's some discussion about some special projects being added to a bond bill and that sort of stuff, and that's politics. You don't like it. You think people would do things just because it's the right thing to do, but that's part of the political process. And so there's still a lot of ebb and flow with this. It is only Wednesday, but I've been told not to rule out a special session. Like if they don't get this thing done by Friday, not to rule out a special session. And I think that's what needs to happen. The state lawmakers need to come together, and find a solution to this problem. And they were elected to make these decisions. And there's a lot of people out there that say, hey, listen, we need a statewide referendum. And I get some of that, but I don't agree with it. I think that, we didn't get to vote on the last teacher pay increase. And if we're just going to conduct an opinion poll, then we're wasting an awful lot of money paying state legislatures. We can have a kid from college tabulate a Twitter poll, and then we'll just begin to govern ourselves. And so this is something that needs to be taken care of. It's been something that's taken way too long, and now the outsiders are coming in saying, hey, this has got to get done. Regardless of the impetus, there needs to be some type of change.
Yeah, I agree. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports on the Miller Lite guest line. And, hey, the legislature just took $1.2 billion away from the governor and said we know how to do it and allocate it better and so on from the coronavirus money. And that wasn't a voter referendum. That was just something that they did. So I think you make a great point there. Going forward, have you heard anything on football? I mean, what are you hearing on where I keep thinking this thing could line up where it's conference only, Steve, and they try to play as many conference games as they can. I wonder if that's how this thing will unfold, and we won't see the non-conference. What do you make of that?
Well, at this point, everything that I've heard is that they're expecting to play the games as scheduled and against the regular opponents. I think this month is big because you've got student athletes kind of mixing together again and having an opportunity to work out, and we'll see infection rates and that sort of stuff and see how they kind of interact with each other. So I think in many ways this is kind of a trial run of sorts. But what's going to be interesting to me is, what happens in season when you have some guys get infected? I mean, they're going to be have to be a lot more people on campus. The probability of infections are going to be much higher. So do you begin to have players that miss 2 weeks due to quarantine? So it'll be a wild season in that respect. But I haven't heard anything yet about them modifying the schedule.
Media access will be interesting, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely will. And I've often wondered, especially during the summer months, if perhaps we don't just do things on a conference call or a Zoom call. Like we do our, our post-practice, meetings in a media room. I mean, you've been in there. I mean, you know what it's like. I mean, so the guy comes and stands at the podium and everybody gets around him a couple feet apart and you hold your recorder out and you ask questions. But you could ask those same questions from home. There's no need to be there personally. And so I think that there will probably be some different protocols to protect the student athletes as well as the media, from being around one another. But I think a lot of these players, in many respects, are going to kind of be in a bubble, and so they'll limit access, I think, personally, for a lot of these players and coaches, and do a lot of stuff virtually.
Let's talk offensive line. Cole Smith, Brent Smith's son, signed with LSU. It was a heck of a battle with Mullen's staff, and I guess at that time, Steve, maybe the end of Miles' tenure, or maybe it was the beginning of Ogeron's. But anyway, what are your expectations of Cole Smith now that he has sat out a year and this will be his time to shine in his last year, eligibility-wise, at his father's alma mater?
Well, he's still got a couple of years of eligibility left.
Oh, two, okay.
I think the main thing with him, yeah, well, he only had the 1 year, and then last year sat out last year.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, he could conceivably play three, but be that as it may, I think Cole's a guy that was really kind of pushing late in the year last year, but of course he hadn't had a chance to perform in front of these coaches, and so that's where I think spring hurts him. But at the same time, this is a guy that I think most people expect to be very much on that first team offensive line when they play New Mexico. And LaQuinston Sharp is a guy that will compete a little bit, but I kind of like him more at guard. But, the interior, I think you've got some options there. But I do think if I had to call it today, if State was getting ready to go play a football game tomorrow, I think Cole Smith would be your starting center. And then we'll kind of see how things go from there. And it's a little different because, he doesn't have quite the size that his dad had. And if you look at those Washington State and Texas Tech lines, I mean, it's incredible how long those guys are. That's not really Cole. Cole's a little bit undersized, so he's kind of limited to play on the interior. But
how big is he?
He's a tough kid. He's probably right there around 6'3", but he's not that 6'7" long-armed guy, because I've talked to so many of these guys. I talked to Luis Vasquez last week, former Texas Tech offensive lineman that went on to play for the San Diego Chargers and won a Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos. And he says everybody outside of the center is playing tackle, whether you're lined up at the guard position or not, because of the way the spacing works. It's a different system. But he said, the center is really the only thing that's kind of the traditional position-wise. So I think that kind of plays in Cole's favor.
Okay. And what was your evaluation of him? You actually go out and evaluate these guys and so on and get to see them play and whatnot. What was your evaluation of him coming out of high school?
Well, a lot of people had Cole as a 4-star, and he ended up being an Under Armour All-American. I actually had Cole as a high 3-star. I didn't have him as a 4-star, and it was not because of his ability. It was because of the fact that I felt he was limited to the center position. Ideally, you'd like a guy that can play up and down the line and play multiple spots for you. And so because I thought he lacked versatility, I had him a little lower than some other people did. But I think that as far as him playing center, I think that's his natural position. I think he is tough enough, strong enough, and smart enough to handle the position. So I think he's certainly capable of being a multi-year starter here in the SEC.
Let's go to the defensive side of the football. What are your expectations for Marcus Murphy going forward as far as being a –
I've always thought
Go ahead.
Well, I always thought Marcus Murphy was an NFL player. I think a lot of people liked him at running back or wide receiver because he was so dynamic with the ball in his hands at West Point High School. But he is one of those guys that was built to play safety. And I think if you look at how much better Mississippi State played defensively when he was in the starting lineup last year, there's really no comparison. What he did at Arkansas, and even against Kentucky, I mean, this is a guy that is very much an SEC safety. The interception against Ole Miss where he baited Matt Corral into the throw, that's not something that he brought with him from West Point. That's something that he learned once he got to Mississippi State. I love his potential. I think he is a guy that will play football for a long time, provided he stays healthy.
Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports on the Miller Lite guest line, the latest out of Starkville, Hail State Insider. Have you had access to any more coaches in the last couple of weeks, the assistant coaches, football-wise? Did we lose, Steve?
Phelps. I've talked to Mason Miller, and I'll talk to Eric Mealy a little bit later this week. But, yeah, I mean, they're still not able to kind of get out there and coach the players or supervise their workouts. But everybody's optimistic about the hand that they've been dealt, and I think that's an important part of it is, give Dan Mullen and Joe Moorhead some credit. They were able to stock the roster with some very good players. I think they're probably a difference maker or two short on offense from being where they want to be. But there's a lot of optimism about getting back on the field and putting a good product on the field this fall.
Give me an idea of what you think about the offensive line talent as a whole, collectively, and kind of compare it against the last 7 or 8 years. And then most people believe that it's a pretty big upgrade coaching-wise with Mason Miller there.
Yeah, well, I think Marcus Johnson did a good job. I think Marcus's best efforts were on the recruiting end. I really think, signing Nick Pendley and Charles Cross in that class was definitely a step in the right direction. So I think you've got some pieces there. It's young and relatively inexperienced, but they're very talented. The biggest issue I see is really with depth. I mean, you got a guy like Stuart Reese that leaves unexpectedly, and that was a bit of a setback because that's a lot of SEC snaps walking out the door. But you've got Darian Parker back. You've got Cole Smith back. You've got LaQuinton Sharp. So you've got some guys, that have had some experience. So they're going to acclimate to this new culture, I think, a little easier than probably some other guys have. But the tackle positions, again, I think you've got some talent there. And it's going to be interesting to see how Mason Miller kind of handles things with Scott Lashley, which I think now that Reese is gone, I think Lashley goes from being the third tackle to being a guard. I think that's probably where he's needed more depth-wise. And I understand that Lashley and Mason Miller had developed a really good relationship already. And I think that's big for a guy like Scott who's trying to kind of integrate himself into the culture. I mean, listen, Scott's got to make it happen this year, right? I mean, he played as a reserve for 3 years over at Alabama. And I really think in hindsight people would say, you know what, he probably messed up not coming here in the first place because I think he would have been a multi-year starter here at Mississippi State because Alabama continued to root over the top of him. And they're able to recruit players, I think, that pushed him farther down the depth chart. But he's a guy that I expect to have a lot of playing time this year. And he's come in and kind of integrated with the guys and moved in, is living with some other offensive linemen. And so I think he'll be good to go. And I think, especially on the interior, I think he'll prove to be a really good addition.
All right. Let's go to basketball real quick. Ben Howland's been signing players. It looks like outside the Georgia point guard that these guys are really skilled, but they're going to be development players and need a year. There's going to be a lot of pressure under Howland this year. Maybe all of it just depends on Woodard coming back or not coming back for Howland and MSU. Do you agree with what I just said, one? And two, have you heard any movement on what Woodard may or may not do?
Well, they pushed everything back. It's one of those things that you look at and you begin to think, okay, when will there ever be any resolution to this? They're holding the scholarship spot open for Robert Woodard. I don't know at this late juncture, even if he decided to go, I don't know how you feel at this point. But you're right. I mean, it's a roster influx. You've got 5 signees right now, and a lot of those guys are, like you mentioned, Devion Smith out of Grayson High School. I mean, he's a guy that was highly recruited, but the majority of this class is solid 3-star guys, mainly from within the natural recruiting footprint. So you should win those guys, but I just don't know if this is one of those classes you look at and say, okay, well, these guys are going to be future starters at Mississippi State. I think it's a work in progress, to say the least. But I don't think that expectations are going to be incredibly high at Mississippi State this year. But I do think it is a very important year for Ben Howland, and this program and this team needs to really take a step forward.
And how do you expect recruiting to look or heat up the next 4 or 5 months before the December signing day for football?
Well, I think it's going to be a land rush because, there are going to be a lot of coaches who are going to be able to get on the road finally once the season starts and have a chance to see these kids, and for many of them, for the very first time. So if a guy is anywhere close on that matrix, there's going to be measurables. So the guy's got to be a certain height and a certain weight. Once they get out there and they see them, I think you're going to see some kids really see their offer list begin to climb, not to mention the fact that as guys commit to other schools, I believe you're going to see a lot of schools panic and reach a little bit more. And Scott, I think the competition is going to be incredible. I think it's going to be a very, very exciting recruiting cycle. I know there's a bunch of kids that have already committed that'll end up flipping somewhere else. I think a lot of guys made reservations to ensure they had something, but have continued their recruiting process. And I don't just mean that, Mississippi State or in the state of Mississippi. I mean nationally. I think there are a lot of kids out there who wanted to be sure no matter what happened, if God forbid we didn't play high school football this year, that they had somewhere to go to play college football. And I think there's going to be a high number of flips. And I think there's going to be a lot of guys that are really G5 talents that get Power 5 offers this year that'll be absolutely incredible, because I think there'll be more bust from the evaluation standpoint this year than probably we've seen in 10 years or so.
Wow. Can you imagine if Leach or Kiffin, Ogeron, whoever gets coronavirus and has to miss 2 games? Steve?
No. It's surreal to think about. I mean, it's like, a lot of those coaches, for the most part, too, that they kind of live in the football complex and they kind of live in the bubble itself.
Sure.
I think they'll be more the case this year. I think they'll really limit their access. Yeah, one of the things I think about is like these the coaches show where you go down to the restaurant and fans get up and ask questions. I think those events are probably on hold for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe you do it in studio somewhere. I don't think you're going to have coaches out there shaking hands and taking pictures like you have in the past.
Man, can you imagine if Nick Saban misses 2 games because of coronavirus? Or
well, if Saban got coronavirus, I'm sure that they would find a way to let him coach it from home.
Yes.
They would figure it out. But yeah, it's weird that we're even having these conversations, and it just kind of speaks to, kind of the oddity that 2020 has become.
If you're Leach who calls plays, have you already started now that everybody's back on campus, identifying somebody on offense that will call plays for you? And I don't think he's got a play caller on the offensive side of the football, but go ahead and groom them, so to speak, over the next 10 weeks or whatever it is for a just-in-case scenario, Steve?
I think you have to have those contingencies in place. And I think that's one of the things that really helps Mike Leach is that he brought his offensive staff with him intact. I don't know who would make those calls. I don't know if it's Meadley or, because of the fact that he's the running backs coach and maybe perhaps that has a better understanding of the offense, maybe some of the other guys, who knows, maybe it's Spurrier Jr. But I think you're right. I think that's a responsible thing to do. I think you have to put some contingencies in place just because you just simply never know what's going to happen. That's one of the things this year has taught us is anything that can happen will happen at some point. You're going to be forced to do some things that make you uncomfortable.
Can you imagine if the quarterback room got coronavirus? Starkville, Oxford,
No.
Baton Rouge, and you move a slot receiver or a running back. Does Leach build in a he's never run the zone. That's the easiest way to put something together in 3 or 4 days. You know what I'm saying? Like Kentucky did last year, Steve. I know he's a phenomenal athlete, but with Lynn Bowden, do you put those contingency plans in place if you're Leach and Kiffin? Hey, if the quarterback room gets it, who am I moving? What running back, slot receiver? Do we run the zone read because that's a quick hit, 72-hour deal? I know it sounds crazy, but don't you think those will be discussed and debated in coaching rooms?
I think those discussions have probably already taken place, and I know a lot of people kind of figured out as they go, but I think you're exactly right. I think the responsible coaches will go ahead and exhaust all possibilities and say, listen, let's just assume the worst-case scenario here, and this is how we have to operate. I don't know that you practice that, but you probably go ahead and put a little limited playbook together, just in case, just because of the fact you've got your crash book, your crisis guide that in case if this happens, here's what we're going to do. Because the last thing you want is all of a sudden you have some unintended consequences of this virus, after a ball game, and all of a sudden you find out Wednesday that your starting offensive line's out. What are you going to do? And so I think you're exactly right. I think responsible coaches have already begun taking those steps to prepare for the possibilities.
Wow. Okay, Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's Page, on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Steve, we appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Always. Take care.
Steve Robertson on the Miller Lite guest line. Enjoy an ice cold Miller Lite this afternoon on the back patio or deck. And you can invite Blake and I, and we'll meet you there, wherever that is. Sal and Mookie's with some wings. Ooh. Kessler Prime with some crab claws. Man. Had some delicious onion rings at Burgers and Blues earlier in the week. You've been eating like a rock star, though.
That's right.
Kessler Prime Saturday. You cooked a big feast on Sunday.
That's right.
Redfish, is that what you said?
That's right. Redfish with a white wine crab sauce. So good. So good. I'm a chef connoisseur.
Well, your culinary skills you're really developing
Through the roof.
And then you hit saltines.
That's right. And sushi at Hokkaido yesterday.
And sushi at Hokkaido.
Monday. Yeah.
For your birthday.
Right.
And we still got to go out to dinner.
Living the dream.
Holy moly. No kidding. And you get to produce the show. The Out of Bounds Show is driven by the GMC Sierra truck at Fowler Buick GMC, Brandon Pearl. FowlerBuickGMC.com.